There's a phrase that I've been using. I've seen a lot of other people using it when we're thinking forward to the post-Trump era and what justice and accountability will look like for all of us. And the other day, I saw a little clip of a stand-up comedy routine from the 1970s in Germany that made me realize I need to stop using this phrase. And we all probably should find a better phrase to use. It also put like a not great sinking feeling right down into the pit of my stomach watching this clip. And I think it brings up a pretty significant issue that we probably need to be addressing in a more honest and open way. So let me show you the clip, and then I want you to see if you can guess what the phrase is. And then maybe we can talk about what the fuck we're gonna do.
Lass mal hören, wie ist denn die Stimmung? Ziegelzange, Ziegelzange! Ziegelzange, Ziegelzange! Hip, hip! Hip, hip! Sieg! Das darf doch nicht wahr sein. Was? So viele alte Kameraden haben dir das.
So that was comedian Johnny Buchart in 1973, tricking an entire audience into outing themselves. Now, I saw a German trying to give context for this, explaining that based on the age of the audience, they were likely children or youth during the war, and therefore, whether or not they were part of the Hitler Jugend, they were at least very much indoctrinated with, you know, all of the propaganda, all of the rhetoric, and very much of it was muscle memory for them. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they were all still loyal or had ever been loyal to the Third Reich. This commenter also pointed out that a lot of Germans, older Germans, didn't want to deconstruct, unpack, and take accountability for what they lived through and participated in the war. Which, as I was reading through that, I was like, oh, that's gonna be the future of MAGA, I think. Yeah, watching that clip and then reading that comment, I was like, oh yeah, MAGA is just gonna fade back into society. There's not gonna be accountability for most of them at all. But there's a whole other layer to it, because the commenter went on to say, don't forget that during the exact time period when this comedy routine was filmed, the Prime Minister of Baden-Württemberg, which is where my family is from, by the way, that Schwaben influence is strong. It gets passed down through the generations. I'm trying to be a cycle breaker. Anyway, okay. His name was Hans Filbinger. Hans Filbinger was a naval judge in the Third Reich. And he sentenced naval officers to death for desertion at the end of the war. Right? You had powerful people in government still at that period of time who were connected, who were part of the Third Reich. It wasn't until 1978 that all of this came to light, and Filbinger basically had to resign in disgrace. Y'all, he was sentencing to death German naval deserters from the end of the war and continuing to sentence them to death after the war ended as late as 1946. So Filbinger initially denied that he had anything to do with this. He tried to silence his main accuser. And it wasn't until more evidence surfaced showing that he had a role in the death sentence of a seaman named Walter Gruger after the end of the war that he was ultimately forced to resign. So what do you think the phrase is that I'm not going to use anymore? And low-key, like maybe none of us should have used it in the first place, because maybe we were using it in a way that was a little bit hyperbolic, a little bit grandiose, and didn't match what happened in history. So no judgment for us. I understand why it was a comforting thing to say, but the phrase is, I look forward to the American Nuremberg trials. I look forward to the Nuremberg trials for the Trump regime, for J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio and Donald Trump, and, Stephen Miller, definitely Stephen Miller. Maybe it's better to look at the Nuremberg trials more in light of the American Reconstruction period after the end of the Civil War. And what I mean by that is that Reconstruction largely failed. After the Civil War, that's how we got Jim Crow. That's how we set up the American South for just like tremendous harm and violence against Black people. By failing to seek recompense to get justice and restitution for enslaved Americans, by failing to hold the Confederacy accountable for their treason, we created Jim Crow. We created institutional racism and a terrible legacy in the United States. Justice was denied so many. And those lasting consequences, the ramifications of those actions, you could argue, have led very much to where we are right now. All of that has contributed to what we are experiencing right now. Our government kind of did a Merrick Garland back then, right? Sweep it all under the rug, slow roll, some performative justice, but don't really change anything, offer some pardons. Let's just forget and move on. It really reminds me on a much smaller level what happened in this country after Donald Trump's first term. Electing Joe Biden, that ugly period is all over. Let's just move along. But all of the harm was still festering under the surface. We had not gotten justice for what happened during Donald Trump's first term, for the insurrection at the Capitol, and therefore it all just comes bubbling back up, right? It all continued to fester and brew under the surface, and now it's just, yeah. Likewise, with the Nuremberg trials, that there were more than a million people who actively participated in the Third Reich and the horrors of the Holocaust. How many people, off the top of your head? History buffs, don't weigh in here, but everybody else, how many people do you think were convicted in the Nuremberg trials? Wait, first, how many people do you think were brought to trial, were summoned before the court? About 140,000 people were brought before the court and investigated. How many do you think were actually brought to trial and convicted? 6,656. Out of a million, whittled it down to 140,000 investigations, down to 6,656 convictions. Right. The initial military tribunal is, I think, what most people think of when they envision the Nuremberg trials, where 19 out of the 22 high-level officials were convicted, and then we kind of forget what happened after that, or we don't really know. In the United States, I don't think we studied the Nuremberg trials pretty extensively, or like maybe at all. We just thought, oh, this is a great period where justice was enacted for all of the victims of the Holocaust. Not really. So of the 6,656 people who are convicted, an awful lot of them ended up having short sentences, rehabilitation, and pardons. What you saw was convictions in the late 1940s, and then throughout the 50s, a bunch of those people were pardoned. And as the court proceeded, as it went on over time, what you saw was a lower and lower and lower conviction rate. Germany itself really felt like it had to focus more on the growing threat of the Cold War in the 1950s, and so there was a pivot in policy. Let's think about rehabilitating rather than enacting justice. And so that sort of was what happened. But tens, if not hundreds of thousands of lower level collaborators never faced any consequences at all. And some of them hid in plain sight. Some of them hightailed it to other countries. Okay, my eldest daughter just came in to rant at me in German. I should have gotten her on camera. She's like, you should go on German Instagram, because low-key, like, Germans aren't really any different today than they were in the 1940s. She was like, if you spend 2 seconds on German Instagram Reels, and she spends a lot of time on German Instagram Reels, she's like, it's just full of overt racism. Their target right now, their scapegoat in the United States right now, it's immigrants, right? 1940s Germany, it was Jews. She's like, right now, what it is Muslim immigrants in Germany. All of the far right hate is focused on Muslim immigrants. And look at the AfD party. What is it now in the Bundestag? They have like over 150 seats out of the 630 seats available. That makes them the second largest party in German government. And this is not to pick on Germans at all. I'm always telling international folks in my comments who are complaining, like, Americans, how could you let fascism rise there? Like, are you kidding me? Fascism is rising all around the globe, in Canada, in Australia, all over Europe, in South America. Like, we're not special here in the US. It's a problem everywhere. Democracy is declining around the globe. Authoritarianism is rising. We could talk about how much that is influenced by billionaire money, because it's very much influenced by billionaire money. But I guess the point in my video here is to say that we in the United States deserve so much more than the Nuremberg trials. The post-Trump era has to do more than the Nuremberg trials. It sure as fuck has to do more than the post-Civil War Reconstruction period did. There has to be justice. There has to be massive sweeping reforms. There has to be recompense. There has to be restoration made. There has to be so much more for all of the people being harmed now than what the victims got after the Holocaust, or what enslaved Americans got after the Civil War. We need massive sweeping reforms in this country. How can we make sure that we get those? We have to be planning now for the America that we want in the future. We have to be fighting fascism now. We have to be dreaming of and building out the plans for what the future of this country will look like. What does justice look like? because it's got to be more. It's got to be more than the Nuremberg trials.